welcome to month 2 of the Summer Delight Block of the Month. We are making this amazing, fabulous quilt. I can actually get it up. This is the final quilt that we are going to be making in this next several months. Month 1, we made this center block, if I can actually get this up. Month 1 was this center block right here. Month 2, we are going to be making this block right here. We're going to be making 4 of this little block right here. Okay? Now, if you got your quilt kit from a shop that is doing a monthly pickup, they may have actually given you a little bit extra fabric as well, because month 3 does more blocks, but time-wise, it's a little bit less than this month. And then therefore, you actually want to balance out how much fabric you're giving your customers. So I did give an option for some shops to give you some extra fabric this month to be used in month 3. So this month we are making this block right here. Okay? So I'm going to put this quilt up. And we're going to get started. Okay, so this block of the month right here, we are using 3 different fabrics today. We are also going to be using pages 5 and pages 6 of your pattern. And the fabric that we're going to be using is fabric A, fabric H, and fabric J. All right, so you cut these into with the fabric, you cut them into squares, and then there are a couple pieces that you leave in your width of fabric strips. So we are going to be learning and using a strip piecing method for quite a few parts of this block. Now the first thing that we're going to do is make some half square triangles. So we've done this in previous patterns. If you've done the wave pool block of the month, we make half square triangles all the time. So fabric A and background, these are the ones that are going to be making some half square triangles. All right. And there's a couple ways that you can do this. You can take your background fabric and take a heat erasable marker, pencil, whatever, and draw a line diagonal to diagonal, like so. Oops, that was not great. Draw it diagonal to diagonal and sew a 1/4 inch off that diagonal. Okay, so you'll put this with one of your pieces and you'll sew it a 1/4 inch away. I use Clearly Perfect angles on my machine. You can see that we have different lines. I actually also have different tape to give me different measurements away from the needle. That is not what normally comes on that. The Clearly Perfect angles comes with just the markings. I just realized I have one here on your machine. So this is super handy if you are trying to make a lot of half square triangles, hourglass blocks, diagonal lines, whatever. So that is the other method. But since I've marked this one, we are going to go ahead and sew a 1/4 inch away from this drawn line from diagonal to diagonal. And I'm going to go ahead and sew it like so. Excess thread here real quick. I'm going to do it on both sides. Like so. And we are going to go ahead and cut this apart. So pretend that I made all of these together. Okay. We're going to cut these apart on the diagonal, and we have 2 different ways that we can trim this. I personally really like our clearly slotted trimmers. This is also by New Leaf Stitches as well. This is recommended if you want to do any of my block of the month patterns. You won't be disappointed. I use these all the time. I actually flip it over to the darker print fabric just so it's a little bit easier to see. But you are going to align your stitch line to where you sewn. You're going to trim up both of the sides and the dog ears. And now you have a perfectly trimmed half square triangle. Okay, I'm gonna throw that away. So now I'm going to take the iron, and I'm going to press this open. Okay. If you don't happen to have a clearly slotted trimmers, you can trim up your half square triangle with a normal ruler. It just involves a little bit more work. Okay. So there you have it, a perfect half square triangle where you don't actually need to do any trimming after you iron. Okay, so, but pretend you don't have this. I'm going to go ahead and press the other half square triangle to show you how you would normally trim up a half square triangle if you don't own a clearly perfect angles. Now, you also have other tools out there like a block ruler. You can do that as well. Or you can just use a normal square ruler that is larger than the piece that you want. All right. So pretend you don't have a block either. I'm going to use just a normal square ruler. I'm going to align this diagonal line on my ruler with the sewn line in the middle. I'm going to say, okay, I'm aligning this. Do I see my 2.5 inch square? Do I have fabric on all 4 sides? If so, I'm going to go ahead and trim off these 2. Rotate my block 90 degrees and then square it up to 2.5 inches. So essentially I've trimmed up 4 sides to make my half square triangle. This is also why I really like the clearly slotted trimmers, is because I don't need to cut 4 sides. I cut 2 in the dog ears and we're done. All right, so now I have magically made a few other of these half square triangles, and we are going to be making this little pinwheel in the middle, okay? And we are going to say, oops, if I can make the pinwheel correctly. There we go. That's the pinwheel direction that we're looking for. In order to make the pinwheel, I'm going to sew the top 2 together, the bottom 2 together, press my seams, and then sew the line across. All right? So again, everything with this block is a 1/4 inch seam. And we're going to sew our pieces together. And because I pressed my fabric to the purple, or fabric A, your seams should nest together. Okay. All right. So now that you've sewn your patches together, you're going to go ahead and take it to the iron and press your seams. You're going to press them in alternating directions, and therefore when you put the 2 halves together, they will nest together and you can sew them easy peasy. All right, so have those pressed. We're going to sew these together to finish out our little pinwheel. You will eventually sew enough half square triangles. You will make 4 of these pinwheels because we're going to be making 4 of these blocks. The next thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking our fabric J, and we're going to take one of the small strips of fabric J and a small strip of background, okay? We're going to sew along the long edge. We're not going to sew along the short edge. We're going to sew along the long edge to make a really long, wide strip that looks like this when it's done. So I'm going to put right sides together and we're going to sew all the way down on a 1/4 inch seam. What I personally find is that I have to pay attention at least a little bit, or else my seam allowance gets a little wonkadoodle. So you want to make sure that you're not just fishing this through the machine, going left and right. You want to make a pretty good effort to keep your 1/4 inch seam consistent the entire way down. we do have a couple of these long strips that we're going to be sewing together, but it'll actually be pretty fun, I promise. So once you've sewn your long strip, you're going to press everything towards the print fabric just to make it a little bit easier for you. And you're going to end up with a pretty long strip that's just half pink and half white. Now that you've made the strip, what's going to happen is we are going to cut pieces from this strip. Okay? Exact dimensions of what this is supposed to be cut into are in the pattern on page 5. But once you iron it out, you have one really long strip, okay? And what I do normally is I will take this and I will say, okay, I'm going to cut my strips. I'm going to take a line and align it to the middle of that fold line to make sure my pieces are square, right? So my center seam line is perpendicular to my cut lines, okay? You will end up cutting a lot of these, but I've also done some, YouTube magic, movie magic, and made several of these. Really, I'm only going to cut 2 for the demo right now. Because what we're going to do from here is we are going to be making, I need to know which direction, we are going to be making a block that looks like this. We're going to take 2 of the pieces and we're going to make a rectangle. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put these right sides together, and because we press towards the pink both sides, for everything, we're going to sew down the side. My seams in the middle will nest. So now we have 4 of these. Ta-da, movie magic, right? So I made a couple of these beforehand, but this is what that looks like. And so if you kind of look at this block right here, we are slowly starting to make our block, okay? Now our next step is we're gonna make these little corners with a pink and a blue and a blue. So this is what we're gonna be looking at, okay? So this is what this block looks like. I give you pressing instructions in the pattern itself, like so, okay? And we're gonna make one for a demo, but I've made a couple more to finish off this one block. So we're gonna take 2 of the small squares, right sides together, and sew them with a 1/4 inch. Everything in this block is sewn with a 1/4 inch seam. And then we're gonna press this in the direction that is stated in the pattern. And I tell you, do pressing instructions when they matter. Sometimes if I don't have pressing instructions made, it doesn't matter which way you sew them or press them. All right, so then the next thing is with a pink on top, we're gonna fold this right sides together and sew this together with the longer blue rectangle. If you want 0 clashing seams at all, the best way to do it is to press everything towards, or press all your seams open. I personally don't like pressing seams open, so I like pressing to a specific direction. Therefore, I do give instructions on, when it makes sense to press seams. All right, so we've made our one. And I magically made a couple more before. And so now that is kind of what our center block looks like so far, right? We're not quite done yet. We have our border pieces to make, and with some movie magic, I have my half square triangles that we've also made at this point. So really what's missing now is our longer outer borders. Okay, we have a couple more of these longer strips to sew together, and what we did with the pink and white strip, we are going to be doing with these bigger strips as well. All right, so we have now, let me get this out of the way so we can see it. We have fabric A. So the order that this is supposed to go in, it's going to be fabric A, background, fabric J, background, fabric A, okay, and background. So, theoretically, how do we want to do this? We can essentially sew a fabric A and a background together, fabric A and a background together, and J and a background of the same size. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do that first to start building this massive strip across. All right, so in order to do this, we are going to do the same thing like we did with the fabric J in background, smaller strips. We're going to take it and sew it long ways together. But we're going to do that together with these two. So we're going to make 2 of those, and we're going to make 1 of these. So again, when you're strip piecing, you want to make sure that you're not wandering as you're going down the long strip, or else when you get to that point, you're going to get a little bit goofy in terms of seam allowances, and the whole strip piece could go a little bit wonky. So you just want to be careful. That you're sewing everything really straight. I do find guiding your fabric is much more smooth than like forcing it. So you want to make sure you're just guiding your fabric. You're not pushing or pulling in any direction. So we've made 1. We are going to make another strip. Okay. Before we do the big strips together. So we have the 2 small ones done. Now we are going to be sewing the 2 larger width fabrics together. Okay, so same thing as we did before. These are just larger widths. that we have sewn together. All right, and we are now going to go press each of these strips to the print fabric, I believe. And then we're going to sew these strips together. All right, so everything is to the print fabric, and I do have directions on, which direction are you pressing all your seams. Like I said earlier, if you don't want any clashing seams, press all your seams open. But I do try to give instructions on the minimal clashing seams, like what is the best way to press seams to get the least amount of clashing seams if you don't like pressing your seams open like I don't. Okay. All right. So I'm going to be setting up my pattern here. So we have fabric A, background. Then the next one that we have is fabric J, background. This is the bigger pieces. Okay. And the pattern actually has you make all 4 blocks simultaneously, right? So it's making you do every step of the way to make enough to make 4 of the same block as we're doing for month 2, as there are 4 blocks total. For the demo here, I'm only going to be doing 1 of the blocks, so you're not going to watch me make all 4 of these blocks at one time. So it does take a little bit of time. For the things that I could try to pre-sew to show you guys how to do it, I did. Making this long strip here and this big what am I calling it? Strip piece panel, maybe. I decided that we were going to make the whole thing on stream just to be able to show you guys how we actually assemble them. You can add them strip by strip, but I do find that to be a little bit not as efficient as if we did them in sections like we are here. In the pattern, I'm pretty much just telling you you're making the whole strip in the order that you're doing it. But this is an efficiency play, essentially, on how to sew all this stuff together. So now we have 3 strips that we're sewing, okay? I'm going to go ahead and sew the left one, or the right one to the center, and then I'll sew the left one to the center. You can actually do whichever one you want, but the easiest way to think about this is no 2 prints are touching each other. So it's always going to be color, background, color, background. We're going to start at the top and go down. So once we've made that portion of the strip, we're going to go ahead and do the same thing like we did before and press towards the print fabric. As our panel is a little bit coming to form now at this point. And the reason why we're strip piecing this is because if we weren't, think about all the little tiny pieces that we would have to sew. Number one, to cut individually and then sew together, right? So what we're doing here is trying to minimize that number because we're going to sew everything together first and then cut it. All right, so now we have our A background that we're gonna sew here, like so. Okay. So once we have that, we're going to press this seam to the print fabric as well. And now our panel is complete. And so very similarly to how we did the pink and white earlier, we're going to take this panel and we're going to cut it to the appropriate sizes that we want, okay? So once I finish pressing this, we're going to cut some strips out of this panel to make our outer borders. Once we have that, we'll have all of our units ready to sew the block together. All right, so now that we have our panel completely done, we are going to go ahead and sew our blocks. Actually, I'm going to move this out of the way a little bit on the bottom, just so I don't accidentally cut anything. That would be terrible. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, and here's the other thing. Because we have these lines, right, like they should all be parallel to each other. So when we're sewing or when we're cutting all of this, we're going to want to measure and make sure our lines are parallel, okay? And you also want to square up the edge, like so. If your pieces is too wide, your seam allowance is too small. So you may want to go back and sew a little bit more. If your total width of your piece is too big, if it's too big, your seams are too small. If it's too small, your seams are too big. So we are going to cut our strips. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Theoretically, to make all 4 blocks, you'll just cut all of them on here, but for now, we're only going to do our 4 like we have. We're going to set this aside for when we finish out the rest of the blocks. All right, so back to where we are here. So we had this laid out fairly nicely. So we have a 9 patch in the middle, right? Is what we ended up with. And then, is it this one? I'm like, which way does this go? I believe it's this way. It's easy to know because your center pieces will match your pieces here. No, they don't. My bad. They're backwards. I have them backwards. They go the opposite direction. It's easy because it goes the opposite direction. All right. And then we have our squares that mirror the ones in the middle. Our half square triangles mirror the ones in the middle. All right, so now we have this block, and you're like, okay, well, how do I sew this together? We are actually going to sew the middle square together first before we sew the outside. So essentially, you can approach this like you're sewing 2 9 patches together. They're just different sizes, right? So 3 by 3 grid, and then a larger 3 by 3 grid. So what we're going to do is we're going to web piece this together. I like web piecing because it makes sure that I don't sew things in the wrong order. And so what that means is I'm going to sew column 1 to column 2 and then column 3 to column 1. All right. But because the square is, you know, larger pieces here, I'm actually going to sew column 3 to column 1 and then sew column 1 to column 2 and 3, just to make it, you know, a little bit more confusing. But what we're going to do, we're going to do this here like so. And I'm going to sew these pieces together, and then I'm going to add the other side. All right. And I'm not going to cut in between them either, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave all of my chain piecing stitching intact. In between all the rows. And I'm doing this for a couple reasons. Number one, I would like this to stay so I know which direction all of my pieces are going to go in. But I also then can drop my piece and everything doesn't fall apart. It also helps me make sure I don't have a block that is upside down, because I have everything still intact. Okay, so still intact. And then I'm going to fold over this side and have these 3 pieces. And then I'm going to take this to the machine and sew it down in the appropriate order. And make sure that all of my pieces are still there. Now, if you have pressing your seams with my seam allowances or my seams that I, seam directions, pressing directions, a large majority of your seams will nest. Okay. All right, so now you have something that looks like this. And now you're going to go ahead and press your rows open to then be able to sew into that middle unit. I'm just pressing my seams in alternating directions. So now this is what my block looks like so far. I'm now going to be able to sew my rows together to finish out this middle unit. You're probably like, Sherry, why are you not pinning your blocks together? Well, the fun part about all of this is all of my seams are nesting on this way. So really, I'm only going that far, seam to seam, without a pin or without positive placement of that seam. So before I go and press the other side, I'm going to sew the other side together. So I'm going edge to seam, nesting all the way across. So you're probably seeing me like adjust my piece because I'm going from a nested seam to another nested seam the whole way down. All right. And now what we're going to do is we are going to press our seams. I realized I forgot to do that. All right. So now what do you have? You have exactly the same thing as we did, sewing the middle unit, but now it's just larger. Right, the scale's a little different. You have a 9 patch, which is 3 by 3. You're going to sew column 1 to column 2 and column 3 to column 1 and 2, and then sew the long seams together. So because I'm doing this again the same way, I'm doing column 3 to column 2, and then I'll sew this side over. I just do it this way just because I like sewing the smaller piece to the larger piece versus the other way around. I will pin some of these because I did get a little bit clashy on a couple of these seams, but some of these are just fine. So I will pin as I can. And I use the fork pins where my seams nest to give me a place to hit. So we have column 3 sewn over. Now I'm going to go and add the first column to what we have, right? So now we're going to fold these over like so and sew it down that direction. Again, I am not unstitching anything or cutting any of these stitches apart. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just pin where I know my seams need to be pinned. And I have a couple places up here that I'm like, yeah, we should probably pin those. Actually, I can hold that one. All right. Things like so. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to press our seams in the appropriate directions and alternating directions. And my iron is leaking, so hopefully it won't be too messy. So our block, once we finish pressing, looks like 3 rows. Okay, we have 2 smaller rows on the outside and 1 really big row in the middle. That looks like this. And what we're going to do now is we're going to sew the rows together. So we're going to fold it down, pin our seams if you need to, and sew our rows together. And in this case, I do pin as much as I need to, or as much as I can, just to make sure that everything sits together just right. You can, in the long panel strip outer border, alternate your seams to make them fit if you want to. That is a tip that I can say, hey, yeah, you can totally do that. Or you can just deal with the clashing seams. Like, honestly, I was thinking about that. I was like, oh yeah, I probably should have just modified this outer seam press direction if I didn't want clashing seams. But it's too late now because I already pinned everything down. But it's a little easier to modify the outer edge of seams to make them go the correct way if you want them all to nest. So done with one side, and then now we will go ahead and sew the other border, or the other row, together. We'll press, and our block for month 2 will be complete. So we have them all pinned. Last seam for the block. And then now we press and we finish. I'm not quite sure why my iron is dropping a lot of water right now, but that's okay. So this month we are making 4 of these blocks. So the instructions are making all of the units as you go, and then you're assembling all 4 blocks together. So pretty much if you're following this demo, hopefully you are making all of the pieces for all 4 blocks together, and you're not just doing the one block like I have done. And voila! This is the block that we are finishing for month 2. You're going to make 4 of these blocks, and that will complete month 2. I will see you guys next month for month 3. Now again, as a reminder, if you've gotten fabric from your quilt shop and you have extra fabric this month, that is completely fine. That is going to be used for month 3, as there is a lot more blocks that we're making in month 3, but they are significantly easier than this. Also, if you have not gotten your 1/4 square triangle ruler, which looks like this. It's a Creative Grids 90-degree 1/4 square triangle ruler. I highly recommend that you get this ruler for next month's blocks. This will save you so much time. So recommending to get that ruler if you haven't gotten it, and I'll see you next month. Bye-bye.